Good morning to you. Mark Seth, HurricaneTrack.com here. Hurricane Outlook and discussion time. We have a lot to talk about. This will be the first of two video discussions today. These morning discussions, I will go over the overnight model guidance as well as the current conditions, of course. And then in the afternoon discussion, we will take a look at the morning model guidance and the current conditions. I'm also doing a blog post each day in the morning, usually by 9 a.m. Eastern Time. That's on exclusively on Patreon. And for our HurricaneTrack insiders, doesn't matter what tier, that goes on Patreon first. But then the two video updates, yes, they go on Patreon first, but then within about 15 to 20 minutes, I put them out on my public YouTube channel. So very busy, not only here, but of course at the National Hurricane Center, a lot going on. Let's take a look first of all at Douglas. Major hurricane, 105 knots. This is forecast now, explicitly forecast to make landfall in Hawaii and could be close to hurricane intensity when it does so. Although I suspect that, as usually happens when these come in from the east like this, that it will start to weaken substantially. Water temperatures out this way are not nearly as warm as we've seen in previous years because the pattern's different. Nevertheless, this is going to be a big rainmaker over here and a big news story for Hawaii. Hilo, Honolulu, and the islands west, all the way across the chain, could get a big dose of heavy rain, maybe some gusty winds, possibly hurricane force winds, depending on the elevation. And we're going to look at this in more detail here real quick, because this is important. I know we want to talk about TD8 and Gonzalo, but we can't forget about Hawaii, right? I mean, any land area, we're going to focus on it. And my worry is, as this comes across, as the center of Douglas comes across, where it does so is going to make a big deal. And anywhere you get this onshore flow and the moisture feeding in, let's just say that it does like this, just as an example, maybe, and it depends if it goes further south, if it's further north, we'll just have to see. But any onshore flow, especially on this windward side of these islands, is going to pile up the rainfall there. But then as those bands rotate around, depending on how well they remain intact, you could get the flow to come in from the other side, where it's the leeward side, usually, where it's drier. I've been to Honolulu and Oahu. I was out there for a hurricane a few years ago, and I noticed that over here on the wet side, it looks like Jurassic Park. It's amazing. But then over here on the drier side near Kapolei, it was like New Mexico. It's just incredible. So these bands, as they come through, the windward side is going to be interesting, but then as it goes by and those bands rotate around, possibly bringing rainfall on these leeward sides, we really need to watch this, and residents in Hawaii need to take this very seriously. Could get some major flooding concerns, as well as the wind damage could be a problem as well. So pay attention to that, please, in the coming days. All right, elsewhere across the tropics, of course, we do have Tropical Depression 8, 30 knots right now. This is the latest advisory from the Hurricane Center. It just updated here. See if the map is, this is still the 7 a.m., so let's see what the public advisory shows. It is getting better organized, they say, and heavy rains likely over portions of Texas by this weekend. At least that headline right there is the only headline. There's no mention in there yet of storm surge or high wind or anything like that, so that's a good sign. And then right down here, hazards affecting land. No storm surge mentioned just yet. This is the area I'm talking about right here, hazards affecting land. Wind will be an issue, as you can imagine. Heavy rainfall. Maybe 8 inches, 3 to 5, maybe 8. I'm thinking there could probably be some areas that have 10 inches. And then, of course, swells and surf could be an issue. And where there is onshore flow, anytime you have the wind blowing onshore, you do pile up the water. So there will be some storm surge, but it's too early to forecast that storm surge just yet. But I bet that starts to pop up. But at least so far, that's not mentioned, and the overall impacts from this is, they're going to be light to moderate, I guess you could say, as this moves in. And at least from the 7 a.m. map that they had updated, oh, there it is, it just updated now. All right. They're on the ball down there. You can imagine what's going on at the Hurricane Center. And we're just getting started. So here it is. It comes in and then goes down. I misspoke yesterday. I called it the Big Bend. I guess I love that part of Florida. This is the coastal bend. So yes, it's headed towards the coastal bend area, perhaps near Corpus Christi, the Matagorda Bay area. But all along, remember, to the right of the track, that onshore flow, as it comes in, will pile up the water very efficiently here along the Texas coastline. And we'll take a look at that closer in the afternoon update, some geography for you. But there will be some storm surge to the right of the track, all right, to the north and east of the track. And then look what happens. It kind of bends and goes southwest on into Mexico. So this will dump some much needed rain over parts of the Rio Grande Valley. That's good. And as long as this continues to move like we're seeing here, you don't see this giant fat bubble stuck over here, showing that it would be slowing down dramatically, that's a good thing. You get the rain, all right? This is good. These are the good things that come from these. You get the rain, but not too much, at least not like Harvey and other systems we've seen, right? Imelda last year. So we get the rain. Yes, there will be some coastal problems, but it looks like this is going to get in and out, not be a real big problem, as long as people use common sense, moor your boats, stay out of the water, watch that rough surf out there. Very interesting to watch nonetheless, but at least not a major problem. And we'll take a look at this more in the afternoon session when I do this update, all right? So let's take a look now at Gonzalo real quick. And Gonzalo faces an uncertain future, but expected to begin affecting portions of the Windward Islands on Saturday. So what happened? Well, the winds are 65, and I would say that's probably generous. Pressure they're estimating. This is all estimated right now. There's no recon for Gonzalo just yet. But look at that latitude there. It's at 9.6 north. That's a fairly low latitude. And just something of note here, the movement is west at only 14 miles per hour. It's not hauling along. Yesterday it was 10, but it's not moving at 20 or 25 where it's just racing through the tropics there. So that's an interesting observation. Hurricane watch in effect for Barbados, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. And we will look at this in more detail as we examine the current situation with it in just a moment. Real quick, the 11 a.m. update here for the map. They still forecast it to become a hurricane, but this might start to change. And I'll show you why. You saw the headline there that Gonzalo faces an uncertain future. All right, I told you it was going to be lengthy. We got a lot to talk about here. We're just on tab 3. There's Douglas. We've already talked about that. Okay, so here's TD8. And the biggest thing with this, and we'll take some close-ups of these in a moment, blobs of clouds, the clusters, not a lot of banding just yet, so it's not rapidly organizing. That's good news. Gonzalo down here really fell apart overnight, ingested some of that dry air. I talked about that yesterday, that when it breathes in and expands itself, it also breathes in that toxic dry air. And when I say toxic, it literally is. Dry air does not hold the moisture that dry air doesn't have the moisture and I know that sounds like I'm digging a hole here. What am I trying to say? The dry air easily wicks up the moisture in the area, put it that way. So even though warm air has the ability, I'm trying to get all my thoughts together here, warm air has the capacity to hold more moisture than cooler air, but the dry air comes in and saps the moisture that's already there. Like if you took a Bounty paper towel, which is dry, and put it on a spill, and no, we're not sponsored by Bounty, it would wick up that moisture. And that's what this dry air does. It comes in and it wicks up that moisture, so to speak, and it collapses those thunderstorm towers that we get, and that disrupts the process. And that's what we saw in the overnight hours with Gonzalo, and we'll take a look at that closer in a moment. Real quick, a look at the Vorticity Signature, getting more improved here. No doubt about the low-level structure of Gonzalo. It's definitely intact, but the convection, the engine, you've got the frame of the car, but the engine is not doing so well right now. Let's just look at it that way. All right, so here it is. Visible satellite animation, courtesy of the weathernerds.org site. And it really is kind of messy looking. There's one pretty solid blob of thunderstorms there. Another cluster over here. And then you see this arc cloud that's come out, little outflow boundary. That is air that is sinking and spreading out this way. That is air that's going away from Gonzalo's center, away from it. You need the air to come into the center and then go up, not fall and spread out like we're seeing very, very vividly here with this little arc cloud that comes out. If you were sitting out there, you see this beautiful, like a shelf cloud that would emanate out from it. And behind it, there's a lot of convection. And that's interesting to see. I don't know if it's because of this boundary and there's maybe some, almost like a cold front, or if that convection that's leading is indicating that conditions are going to be better the farther west Gonzalo travels. It's hard to say. I don't know. None of us know for sure. That's why intensity forecasting is so difficult. But what we can see, and it's very obvious, the organization of it is not nearly what it was yesterday, but that doesn't mean that it can't come back. But the small size of it is really going to have a tough time. We'll see what happens. We'll see what the 12Z, especially the GFS, we're going to get to that in a minute. It's been so aggressive with this. We'll see what it, quote unquote, thinks going forward. Meanwhile, on the uptick, apparently, is Tropical Depression number 8. And it's definitely getting better organized, you can tell, but still more clusters of storms than anything else. It's trying, but, you know, we've certainly seen much better organized in the Gulf, and when that happens, obviously you have a lot of major problems. So the slower this develops, the better, for obvious reasons. And there's really not much else to say about it. It's got a lot of warm water to work with on its way over here towards the coastal bend. And it's just going to be a matter of how quickly can it organize with all this. It's, you know, look how large it is, too. It takes up a pretty large area. How quickly can it organize any kind of a well-defined center or core? I think that'll be a big player in terms of what happens later. And look real quick at all these yellow speckles in here. That's the lightning. A lot of lightning out there, a lot of energy, a lot of available energy for sure, and a big rainmaker and a windstorm, coastal problems, etc. definitely coming up for Texas. So a few things to point out. This is Jack over at the Weather Models site, weather.us and the weathermodels.com. He's bullish, meaning, you know what that means, right? Bullish and bearish. So he's optimistic in terms of TD8's future for strengthening, and pessimistic is another way to look at it on Gonzalo's future, just meteorologically speaking. And then he talks about this next system, no info yet, on another tropical wave that we're definitely going to have to watch. The interesting thing is to look at his graphic here. Definitely some dry air. And look at this little streamer of it that got in and has been impacting Gonzalo, but a tremendous amount of dry air to the north, the Saharan air layer. I think it's more that it tapped into this and ingested it into the circulation rather than it's necessarily the SAL, the SAL, the Saharan air layer. Hard to say for sure. But again, that very small circulation probably working against Gonzalo at the moment. And Philippe here, and I don't know how to say his last name. I need to message him and just ask him, hey, Philippe, how do you say your last name? Would it be Papin or Pap, like P-A-P, like a pap smear? Or is it whatever? Philippe Papin or Papin, doesn't matter. He's very smart. That's what I do know. And the way he can analyze these graphics is just amazing. And the bottom line for us laymen, because Philippe definitely has a leg up on me, this is the dry air. Okay, that worked its way in. This green in here is the more moist air. It's still trying to tap the intertropical convergence zone, but it is pulling in that dry air. This is the analysis from the model guidance, and that's the reason, at least one of the reasons, why Gonzalo has kind of lost its way. So let's look at this real quick, just to kind of give you a look at the intensity guidance and some other track stuff. This is a great website, by the way. This is the Tropical Cyclone Guidance Project, the real-time analysis here. 12 UTC, this is for Gonzalo, and when you actually look at the map, you see everything there. So let's go to Douglas first, real quick. This is the track guidance. Clearly going to head over Hawaii. No question about that. The intensity, down, 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 thank goodness. Will it do so in time to spare Hawaii any hurricane winds? Well, this is the time frame that we're talking about, roughly through here. So yes, hopefully so, owing to the fact that water temperatures out this way, not quite as warm as we've seen in years past. Moving east, TD number 8, also 12 UTC guidance. What does that mean real quick? Well, it means this was initialized at 8 a.m. Eastern time. Track guidance, very, very, pretty tightly clustered there for the most part. A trek towards the coastal bend, and even some of these models, that's not what's going to happen, but showing the vortex surviving long enough to get into New Mexico. Not going to happen. This is going to die away and get over the mountains of Mexico, and that will be that. What about the intensity? This is a great way to plot this. Some of the guidance trying to hint at hurricane intensity. I wouldn't put too much stock in that. It's going to make landfall here around this time frame right here. Let's just use purple. Roughly 60 hours out. So maybe moderate tropical storm. That seems reasonable. And then, of course, a steady decay as it moves inland, as you would expect. Now, for Gonzalo, this is interesting. This is the 12 UTC guidance as well. Track guidance, of course, windwards roughly into the Caribbean. A lot of track models on top of it. But what about intensity? Well, generally speaking, the intensity is still fairly clustered that this will survive. We're not seeing this yet. We'll see what the afternoon guidance shows. We're not seeing all the models just plummet down. So there's still, maybe they just quote unquote don't know yet about the initial situation, and there's a lot more that we could look at just as an example. The ship's diagnostic message, and we could be here all day. This is a really fascinating product. If you know how to interpret it, it talks about the shear, the moisture, the RH, that's the relative humidity, the upper ocean heat content. This is an amazing product if you know how to interpret it, and maybe we'll go over that another time with a more impactful looking event than spending time on it right now. But just know that this is out there. But basically, just look at one parameter. We'll at least do that. I'm not going to tease it and then just walk away. 14, 15 knots of shear at the most there, you can see 66 hours out and 76 hours out, something like that. Not too bad. 15 knots, okay, that's not too bad. Where the shear comes from is that shear, and shear is a change of wind direction and speed with height, is it injecting more dry air? We'll have to see about that, and it talks about the direction and other facets of that in this graphic table, or the table, whatever. It's not graphical. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. I get so excited about showing these products. It's a table, so check it out here on the real-time analysis from just Google Tropical Cyclone Guidance Project, or RAL Tropical, and it's all there. But it's interesting to note that this hasn't trailed off just yet. All right, as we wrap things up here, and maybe I need to go take a nap. This is the 0Z GFS from last night. 0Z last night. This is the GFS. Like I said, there's TD8, and way off over here, not quite on this particular map extent just yet, is Gonzalo. So let's move this out into time, 24 hours. So this will be valid tonight. It shows a little bit better organization with what would presumably be Hannah by this time. And then you're going to see Gonzalo come into the chart down here on the right, going out another 24 hours. So now we're at 48 hours. Not much with this system. Really, that's not a big reflection at this particular layer, 850 millibars. But that's impressive. And I talked about this yesterday. And this is what confuses me. And we'll see what the 12Z stuff shows. That's why I'm doing another video this afternoon, so we can go back and look at what the 12Z guidance has. That's really, really impressive, the way the GFS bundles all that energy there. It's almost like a black circle. And that just shows you the pressure gradient and the way that those height lines, just it's a very stout signature of a healthy tropical cyclone compared to what would be Hannah over there is not. So we'll see what the afternoon, when we look at this in the afternoon, what the 12Z guidance shows. Moving on out, another 24 hours, Gonzalo presumably going through the windwards, maybe near Barbados, St. Vincent, that vicinity, and Hannah to be gone somewhere over the Rio Grande Valley. Moving out another 24, this is 96 hours. Into the Caribbean it goes, and then some interesting little feature here tries to kind of rotate up around some of this leftover energy. We'll see about that. You know, small, but you never know. Water temperature is very warm. That's interesting. And then finally by 120, I mean, look, it comes in and really tries to ramp up there in the Acadiana area of Louisiana. So, wow. Anyway, at hour 120, Gonzalo may or may not be alive. It may or may not be south of Hispaniola. We'll see. And then that's interesting. We'll look at that this afternoon in more detail. Now, let's look at the Euro. This is 24-hour increments is the way it goes. So this is the initial last night. This is tonight. And then finally Friday night. And you see, not much with Gonzalo and a little bit more oomph with Hannah to be. And this is 72 hours out. At least this time, it's not deepening that system over Texas like it did yesterday. That really spooked me. And it pretty much kills off Gonzalo down here, almost scraping the northern part of South America. So we'll see. This is kind of a battle. This is 72 hours. Let's just compare the GFS and the Euro at 72 hours. The Euro is much faster. The GFS is stronger and slower. Very interesting. All right. So, and then finally at 96 hours, there's practically nothing out there. And then at 120, and by 144, and then 168, just a week out, another system coming in. According to the Euro here, ECMWF, yes, indeed, the hurricane season kicking into, I won't even call it high gear yet. This is more like second or third gear. We're not even into high gear, trust me. So a lot to keep up with, absolutely. What do you take away from this? Well, it depends on where you live. If you're in Hawaii, you need to be getting ready. Coastal bend of Texas, be aware, use common sense when this rolls in. A lot of heavy rain, some coastal impacts, but probably not a hurricane. But hey, you never say never, right? And Gonzalo, that headline from the Hurricane Center, just kind of summing it all up here, says it all. It faces an uncertain future. Let's see what the morning guidance shows, and we'll revisit this in the afternoon. All right? As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget, I'm on Twitter at HurricaneTrack. You're watching on YouTube, that's also HurricaneTrack. Easy to find, and I am supported by our awesome crowdfunding group, over 314 strong now, plus our HurricaneTrack insiders for more than 15 years. This has really grown. Our crowdfunding supporters on Patreon, check it out. The description has the link to that info. Have a great rest of your morning. Take a few hours to digest everything I said, and I'll be back with you again later this afternoon.